More than ever, social media plays an important role in daily life. From connecting with friends and family to deciding where to order takeout, social media apps are integrated into everyday life. And we can find them everywhere on our computers, our phones, our televisions, and even in our cars. Many of us use apps as a means of making personal and professional connections, but all of that goodwill can be undone by scammers and identity thieves who set up traps on these apps with a goal of capturing users' money and personal information. Don't overshare your personal information. If you post too much information about yourself, an identity thief can find information about your life, use it to answer security questions on your accounts, and get access to your money and personal information. Be aware that those harmless quizzes may actually provide a hacker with a lot of personal information that they can use to crack your passwords, like your favorite color, first pet, or places you have lived. All of these might be part of security questions used to reset passwords. Never post your full name, social security number, address, phone number, or account numbers in publicly accessible sites. Be careful of photos that inadvertently share that information. Don't post a photo of financial or legal documents like checkbooks or passports where the numbers might be stolen. All of your accounts should have unique, complex passwords or passphrases, and users should turn on two-factor authentication if it is offered, and use the security features available in the apps to block public access to their posts. Adjust the security settings on your accounts to only allow friends and family to view your posts, and consider turning off the location services on your phone so the photos you post online are not tagged with GPS data. Be aware that some applications that track your real-world location make it visible to other users. Consider turning off location features that make it possible to track where you are at a given time or normal routines for runs and bike rides. To avoid scams, users should be very suspicious of links and posts that direct them to unfamiliar websites or that advertise unrealistic offers for popular products. Scammers often use fake account support emails to gather login details from social media users. These phishing emails falsely warn recipients that they need to provide their username and passwords in order to update a social media account or avoid an account suspension. Delete similar emails and log directly into the service if you need to check your account status. Help protect your identity and wallet by tightening the security around your social media accounts and by thinking before you click on links in social posts. Enroll in Consumer Protection 101 by subscribing to our YouTube channel or following us on social media. More resources are available on the Consumer Protection 101 webpage at www.datcp.wi.gov.